Christmas morning 2009, and thousands of people boarded planes all over the world in a last-minute dash to make it home. But one man's journey had a very different motive. A 23-year-old suicide bomber, trained by Al-Qaeda, planned to destroy a busy passenger jet bound for the US.
Terrorists come back to aviation over and over again because it is such a dramatic target.
The plot was painstakingly devised to circumvent our aviation security systems.
These are guys who are extraordinarily inventive in the ways they attack the system.
Technologies developed over decades to defend us from terrorist attack.
I don't know of one case where any form of technology caught a terrorist with a bomb.
The terrorists have so many options. We can't protect against everything.
The plot would also expose fatal flaws in Western intelligence systems.
The American intelligence system had enough to know that Umar Farouk Abdulmutallab should not be allowed to get on the plane.
This is the story of how Al-Qaeda smuggled a bomb on board Flight 253. Abdulmutallab's 7,000-mile journey will take him via Lagos to Schiphol in the Netherlands. There he plans to board a flight to Detroit. As the plane prepares to land in America, he will explode his device. Just after 8 p.m. on Christmas Eve, Umar Farouk Abdulmutallab touched down in Nigeria, completing the first leg of his journey. He had smuggled his bomb through one airport security check and onto a plane undetected. He was now 22 hours away from his goal, detonating his bomb inside a US plane packed with passengers. At Lagos Airport, one of Africa's biggest, Abdulmutallab faced a well-established series of aviation security checks before he could board his flight to Schiphol. At Lagos Airport, CCTV captured this image of Abdulmutallab calmly reading a newspaper as he waited to go through security screening. He was told to put his shoes through the X-ray scanner. The measure was introduced 8 years earlier after shoe bomber Richard Reed smuggled explosives onto a plane hidden in his trainers. But Abdulmutallab had his explosives hidden elsewhere. He passed through the metal detector without his bomb setting off the alarms. Since the package of explosive was hidden in Abdulmutallab's groin, a standard physical pat-down would almost certainly not have been intrusive enough to discover it. His device had been meticulously designed to evade airport security. In fact, it was a kit of component parts he wouldn't even assemble until he's on board Flight 253. The main charge was the high-explosive pentaerythritol tetranitrate, or PETN, a compound widely used in demolition.
PETN is readily available. It can be used in powder form in small amounts to have great effect. It's been used by terrorists over the years, so it's not a new compound or a new concoction.
The terrorists knew that if Abdulmutallab handled the bomb, he could be caught by electronic trace detectors that sniff out explosive residue. So it's likely someone else created the device. The package, once tightly packed, would be no bigger than a mobile phone, and its plastic wrapping would deter detection. The idea of smuggling Abdulmutallab's explosive through security checks in his underwear had already been road-tested by Al-Qaeda. 4 months before the Christmas Day attack, a suicide bomber had blown himself up in a failed attempt to assassinate a Saudi government minister. It was discovered that he, too, had passed through a metal detector with PETN hidden in his underpants. Western intelligence issued no official warning to alert aviation security officials to al-Qaeda's new deadly tactic. At 8:35 p.m., Abdulmutallab presented his passport. It held a US visa granted 18 months earlier when he'd been at college in London. He cannot board a US flight without it. If he had subsequently come under suspicion, the US authorities might have revoked it, stopping his mission in its tracks. Abdulmutallab's visa was still valid, and he was allowed to continue his journey. There was nothing in Abdulmutallab's prestigious Nigerian background to suggest he might be a suicide bomber in the making. The young man's journey towards jihad appears to have begun 4 years earlier while he was studying engineering in London.
He was the head of an Islamic society at his university. At the same time as Abdulmutallab was getting more and more deeper into his studies of Islam, he also was expressing on internet sites how lonely he was and how isolated he felt. It's the kind of recipe for someone who could get caught up in the kind of extremist views.
In 2008, he left London to continue his studies in Dubai. Then he abandoned the course and traveled across the Middle East. His destination was Yemen. One of the poorest countries in the region, it's been plagued by civil war and weak government. By 2009, it had become a crucible for al-Qaeda terrorism. Abdulmutallab had dropped off the radar, but nobody suspected that he had joined the ranks of al-Qaeda. Except for one man, his father.
In November 2009, Abdulmutallab's father entered the U.S. Embassy in Abuja. He was concerned about his son, that his son was growing more and more radical, and that he was falling in with the wrong crowd and had traveled to Yemen.
His dad is the chairman of a very big bank in Nigeria, and so this is not like just nobody coming in from the street. He's someone that the officials there respect and take a warning quite seriously.
The embassy sent a warning, called a Visa Viper, to the National Counterterrorism Center in McLean, Virginia. Analysts there established Abdulmutallab had a visa allowing him to travel to the US. But it was decided that his father's concerns were not enough to revoke it.
Abdulmutallab arrives in Schiphol just around dawn. It's 5:37 a.m. Now it's Christmas Day.
After a journey of 11 hours, Abdulmutallab is now within sight of his final objective: to get on board Flight 253 to Detroit and take down the plane and everybody on board. But Amsterdam's Schiphol airport is where Abdulmutallab's murderous plan is most likely to fall apart. It is one of the world's biggest and busiest hubs, handling on average 1,100 flights a day.
Abdulmutallab, as he makes his journey from Africa and Ghana to Nigeria to Amsterdam on his way to the United States, is passing into bigger and bigger airports. And in fact, he's passing into more sophisticated security systems. In Amsterdam in particular, the security system is considered very strong.
The US demands that all passengers flying to the States face extra questioning by security personnel employed by the Dutch authorities. It's a professional, one-on-one grilling designed to blow a terrorist's cover story.
He's already traveled for 11 hours. He's probably tired. He's also probably increasingly nervous. You know, he's basically a novice at this.
This is the last line of defense. This is the place where you absolutely have to stop the guy who has intent.
If there's going to be a time that he's going to stumble, this is probably the moment.
While they're asking the questions, they are looking for reactions from the person.
He's facing questions about, where is he going and what is he doing?
Might be a question as to why he was carrying no coat with him when he's going to a cold destination, why he's got so limited baggage on him. It's not going down that checklist and just ticking boxes, but actually digging a little bit deeper if there's even the slightest suspicion that somebody may not be as clean as would appear.
Al-Qaeda intensively train their operatives in preparation for this, the toughest moment of their mission.
They looked at his passport, they asked him questions, they looked at his visas, they looked him in the eye, which they're trained to do, and he was able to convince those people that he was not a threat.
As the passengers check in for Northwest Airlines Flight 253, information that Abdul Muttalib was about to board an American plane was winging its way around the globe to US officials. After check-in, and up to 30 minutes before the plane departs, airlines flying to the States must submit details of all passengers to the National Targeting Center. One of the NTC's jobs is to check passenger names against watch lists of individuals who might pose a direct threat to the US. A month earlier, his father had warned the CIA that his son might be mixing with Islamic extremists. Although it wasn't considered enough to revoke Abdul Muttalib's US visa, his name was added to a counter-terrorism database of people thought to pose a low-level threat.
Abdul Muttalib's name, because of what his father had reported, appeared on the broad terrorist identities data mart environment, the TIDE database. That's almost 600,000 individuals at this point. That's the grand radar screen of suspect individuals. Abdul Muttalib was on a list for the US government, but it wasn't the no-fly list, which would have disallowed his boarding of the flight to the United States.
By 7 a.m. on Christmas Day, there was just one last obstacle standing between Abdul Muttalib and Flight 253 to Detroit. The final pre-gate security check. And one single piece of technology that could prove his downfall. Schiphol, along with many Western airports, had started introducing millimeter wave body scanners to their security armory. Millimeter waves are radio waves set to a frequency that allows them to pass through clothing. When they encounter a solid surface like the human body, they bounce back, and the reflected waves create a naked image that reveals any object concealed beneath clothing, even non-metallic ones. The technology offers the best chance of detecting a suspicious package concealed on someone's body. By Christmas Day 2009, Schiphol Airport had a number of body scanners on site. But they had been unable to reach final agreement with US authorities on how they should be used. It meant that Abdul Muttalib faced only the standard metal detector and X-ray technology. He cleared both without any incident. Abdul Muttalib had overcome the twin safeguards protecting Flight 253's passengers from terrorist attack. Conventional airport technology had failed to detect the bomb in Abdul Muttalib's underwear. And the world's most sophisticated intelligence system had proven unable to identify Abdul Muttalib as a deadly threat. The 23-year-old suicide bomber was poised to launch a Christmas Day attack that would shock the world. At 8:55 a.m., Northwest Airlines Flight 253 took off from Amsterdam bound for Detroit. There were 290 passengers and crew on board. 2 rows behind Daniel, another young man was traveling alone. Seated in 19A was 23-year-old Nigerian Umar Farouk Abdulmutallab, an al-Qaeda-trained suicide bomber. He had reached the final phase of his mission to bring down Flight 253 and everyone on board. Officials at Customs and Border Protection in Virginia ran Flight 253's passenger names against the TIE database. The list of nearly 600,000 people of concern to the US, and they got a match.
That was enough for them to decide, even before the plane had landed, that he was going to be subject to questioning, aggressive questioning at the airport.
Abdulmutallab's presence on the TIE database was enough to have him questioned on arrival in the States, but not enough to turn the plane back.
We're now flying over the Great Lakes. We should be getting into the Detroit area in about 40 minutes.
40 minutes before landing, he left his seat.
Pretty cold with light snow. We'll get you on the ground as soon as possible.
He made his way to the lavatory. It was time for him to assemble his bomb, smuggled on board as a kit of parts. No one knows precisely what he did during the 20 minutes he spent inside the cubicle. It's thought he assembled the components of his bomb and primed his chemical detonator.
He's probably gone through this routine a number of times, and it's his job. This is his big assignment. This is why he was chosen to execute on the construction of the bomb. And it has to be done on the plane, because if it were assembled, and it probably would have been noticed as he was getting onto the plane.
Experts believe Abdulmutallab would have filled his syringe with liquid chemical. By plunging this deadly cocktail into the PETN, he hoped to trigger a violent chemical reaction, generating enough heat to trigger the explosion. But the process is difficult to achieve even in a laboratory, because the intense heat only lasts milliseconds. 20 minutes till landing, and Northwest 253 began its approach into the Detroit area. On the ground, border and customs officials made their way to the gate to question Abdulmutallab when he landed.
And he comes back to his seat and tells others apparently sitting next to him that that his stomach is upset, and he pulls a blanket over his body.
At around the time Flight 253 crossed the Canadian border and entered US airspace, Abdulmutallab started to inject his chemical into the PETN.
The very first thing that happened was a loud pop in the cabin.
And all of a sudden I heard a pop.
Sounded to me like an electrical current that snapped.
The sound unnerved the passengers, but nothing out of the ordinary could be seen. Then all of a sudden,
I hear the word fire. So I think, oh my God, I think the plane's on fire.
And I opened my seatbelt and I just turned my back and I start looking what is happening.
I immediately jumped up and started looking around, and I saw there was smoke coming out of that area. There was flashes of light.
And then I smell non-natural things burning.
That smell hit me and started coughing.
In seat 19A, flames are seen climbing the side of the plane's fuselage.
I could see all the flame and the fire and the smoke and everything.
There was a man sitting in the seat where the fire had started, and my first thought was that he had lit his blanket on fire.
And there was a moment then where this woman's voice cut through everything. What are you doing? What's going on? And I could tell from the timbre in her voice that there was something was amiss.
The passenger leapt across the seats and grabbed Abdulmutallab.
He put him in a headlock and dragged him forcibly out into the aisle.
One flight crew member, she comes back with the fire extinguisher in her hand. I mean, she's running full speed. And then I hear the noises of a fire extinguisher. You think, okay, incident under control. So, little little bit of exhale.
At 11:53 a.m. on Christmas morning, Flight 253 touched down at Detroit Airport.
I have never felt such a sense of relief in my whole life.
It was the first time since the incident started that I had any notion that I would survive it.
First thing I said is, thank you, God. You heard my prayers.
As soon as Flight 253 came to a halt, Umar Farouk Abdulmutallab was removed from the plane.
I had a pretty good look because they took him out the door right in front of me, and I just remember that he wasn't crying, he didn't look angry, he didn't look happy, you know, just poker face, if you will.
Northwest Flight 253 was held on the runway while US authorities questioned failed suicide bomber Abdulmutallab. He reportedly confessed he was trained by Al-Qaeda in Yemen and claimed there were hundreds more like him, primed to attack planes bound for the US. He later pleaded not guilty to attempted murder. He believes that Al-Qaeda hoped the explosion would rupture the plane's fuselage, igniting the fuel tanks and causing a catastrophic crash. But Abdulmutallab also defeated security screening at 3 international airports, proving that Al-Qaeda had found a way to breach the existing systems.